Hello, my friend. Tonight we begin a quiet journey across 2.5 centuries following the remarkable story of America's Independence Day. As the evening settles around you, imagine the last glow of sunlight fading over gentle hills while a distant church bell drifts through warm summer air. Somewhere nearby, the scent of fresh grass lingers after a long afternoon, and the soft crackle of a small fire reminds you that even the greatest moments in history often began with ordinary people gathering together. Tonight, you're not rushing toward battle or standing in crowded halls. Instead, you're walking slowly through the lives of countless men, women, and children whose choices gradually shaped a nation and in time influenced much of the modern world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I would also love to know where you're listening from tonight and what your local time is as you begin this peaceful, historical journey together with thousands of other listeners around the world. Now it's time to rest. Your mind drifts across the wide Atlantic Ocean long before fireworks painted the skies each summer. The sea stretches endlessly beneath a calm sky, carrying wooden ships whose sails swell gently with the wind. Each voyage lasts weeks, sometimes months. Every creaking timber seems to whisper that another chapter of history is quietly approaching. The story does not truly begin in 1776. Like the roots of an ancient oak tree, it reaches much deeper into the earth. During the early 17th century, small English settlements appeared along the eastern coast of North America. Their survival was far from guaranteed. Disease spread easily, food shortages arrived without warning, winters felt longer than expected, and unfamiliar landscapes tested every newcomer. Yet people continued arriving. Some sought opportunity, others hoped for religious freedom. Many simply dreamed of owning land that would never have been available to them back in England. Records confirm that the settlement established at Jamestown in 1607 became England's first permanent colony in mainland North America. Its earliest years were marked by severe hardship. Hunger became such a constant companion that later generations would remember one dreadful winter simply as the starving time. Even so, the colony endured. Further north, families seeking greater religious independence founded additional communities. Their lives revolved around farming church meetings, fishing boats, simple wooden homes, and the endless rhythm of changing seasons. At first glance, these scattered settlements hardly seem connected. Weeks could pass before news travelled from one colony to another. Roads were rough. Forests stretched for hundreds of miles. Mountains formed natural barriers. Rivers often served as the fastest highways. You slowly walk along one dusty village street. Chickens wander freely between cottages. A blacksmith's hammer rings through the morning air. Smoke curls gently upward from stone chimneys as bread bakes inside simple ovens. Life feels surprisingly ordinary. Children chase one another through muddy paths. Neighbours exchange tools. Merchants argue politely over barrels of flour. Fishermen prepare their nets before sunrise. No one standing here imagines that their descendants will someday celebrate a holiday recognized around the world. Oddly enough, many colonial homes deliberately painted their front doors in bright colors, not only for decoration, but because travelers often identified houses long before street numbers existed. A bright red or deep blue doorway could become the closest thing to an address in an isolated settlement. Little details like these remind you that history is built from everyday habits, just as much as famous speeches. As decades pass, 13 separate colonies gradually emerge along the Atlantic coastline. Each develops its own character. Virginia grows wealthy through tobacco plantations. Massachusetts becomes known for trade education and religious communities. Pennsylvania welcomes remarkable cultural diversity. The southern colonies depend heavily upon plantation agriculture. Northern ports thrive through commerce. Every colony speaks with its own voice. Yet beneath those differences, something slowly begins connecting them. English law, shared language, similar customs, trade between neighbours, common fears, common hopes. The British Empire, meanwhile, continues expanding across oceans. London views these distant settlements as valuable possessions, important sources of trade and raw materials. Most colonists consider themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown. Why would they think otherwise? Britain possesses one of the world's strongest navies. Its merchants reach nearly every ocean. Its government appears stable. Many colonists proudly celebrate their connection to the empire. For generations, independence remains almost unimaginable. You continue strolling through village marketplaces where imported tea sits beside locally made candles. Cloth from England hangs near handmade wooden furniture. Farmers discuss weather while ships unload goods from across the Atlantic. Everything appears connected. Everything seems permanent. Yet permanence has a curious habit of surprising people. A council record from several colonies proves that local assemblies increasingly managed many everyday affairs with relatively little direct interference from Britain. This quiet habit of governing themselves would later become more important than anyone fully realized. Without intending it, colonists slowly gained experience making local decisions. They elected representatives, collected taxes, maintained roads, organized militias, resolved disputes. Step by ordinary step, they learned practical self-government. No dramatic announcement marked this transformation. No grand trumpet sounded. Instead, independence quietly practiced itself long before anyone declared it aloud. One curious footnote from colonial life might make you smile. In several communities, church attendance was considered so important that local officials occasionally fined people who repeatedly skipped Sunday services without acceptable reasons. Imagine explaining to your neighbour that you overslept only to receive an official penalty for doing so. I've certainly kept unusual priorities. The colonies also became places of remarkable diversity. English settlers mixed with Scottish families, Irish immigrants, German farmers, Dutch merchants, French communities, Africans, both free and enslaved, and countless Native American nations whose histories stretch back thousands of years before European arrival. These worlds constantly interacted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently, often uneasily. No simple story can fully capture such complexity. Arguments continue among historians regarding how strongly a shared American identity had already formed before the middle of the 18th century. Some believe local loyalties remained far stronger than any broader colonial identity. Others suggest that common experiences were already weaving invisible threads between distant settlements. Perhaps both ideas contain some truth. History rarely moves in straight lines. Instead, it resembles a slow-flowing river gathering countless smaller streams before becoming powerful enough to reshape entire landscapes. As evening settles across the colonies, once again lanterns glow softly inside wooden windows. Horses rest after long journeys. Families gather around modest tables. Someone quietly reads aloud from a well-worn Bible. Somewhere else a violin fills a farmhouse with gentle music. No fireworks brighten the night. No declaration exists. No Independence Day appears on any calendar. Only ordinary lives continue beneath peaceful stars. And yet without these quiet beginnings, without these villages' farms, harbours, workshops, churches, and countless forgotten conversations, none of the extraordinary events still waiting ahead could ever have unfolded. The greatest revolutions often begin so quietly that almost no one notices them at all. For a moment it feels as though the quiet rhythm of colonial life will continue forever. Dawn arrives over green fields, fishing boats leave the harbour before sunrise, merchants unlock their shops while the smell of fresh bread drifts through narrow streets. Children hurry towards small schoolhouses carrying slates beneath their arms. The world appears steady, predictable, almost comforting. Then history gently changes direction. Far across the Atlantic, Britain emerges victorious from a vast global conflict that later generations would call the French and Indian War. In North America, part of the much larger 7 Years' War. Records confirm that Britain's victory in 1763 greatly expanded its empire, giving it control over enormous territories that had once belonged to France. Victory, however, came with a remarkable price. Wars are expensive. Empires often discover that triumph can leave behind mountains of debt just as surely as defeat. British leaders looked across the ocean toward the American colonies with practical eyes. The colonies had benefited from British military protection during the war. Surely many officials reasoned it seemed fair that the colonists should now contribute more toward the empire's growing expenses. On paper, the idea appeared reasonable. In practice, it would become one of history's most famous misunderstandings. You walk beside the crowded docks of Boston where sailors unload barrels of molasses, crates of cloth, bundles of iron tools, and fragrant tea packed carefully inside sturdy wooden chests. Commerce fills the air with noise. Wagons creak beneath heavy loads. Dock workers shout directions while gulls circle overhead. Business has always depended upon trust. Now uncertainty quietly enters every conversation. The first major shock arrives with new efforts by Britain to tighten enforcement of customs duties and trade regulations. Smuggling, which had become surprisingly common throughout the colonies, suddenly receives far greater attention from customs officials. Merchants grumble. Ship captains grow nervous. Lawyers discover new clients. Ordinary shoppers begin noticing small changes in prices. None of this feels revolutionary. Not yet. The turning point begins when Parliament passes the Sugar Act in 1764, followed by the Stamp Act in 1765. The Stamp Act requires official stamped paper for newspapers, legal documents, licenses, contracts, and many printed materials. The tax itself is not enormous. Its meaning is. Many colonists ask a simple question. If Parliament can tax them without their consent, what limits remain? You pause beside a small print shop where newspapers roll fresh from the press. The room smells of inker, damp paper, hot metal, and freshly cut wood. Printers become some of the busiest people in the colonies because ideas now travel almost as quickly as ships. One newspaper criticizes the new tax. Another urges patience. A third warns that important rights may be slipping away. Words begin accomplishing what armies cannot. They connect distant communities. They transform private frustrations into public conversations. A council record proves that representatives from several colonies gathered in New York during the Stamp Act Congress of 1765 to coordinate their response. Although they remained loyal to the Crown, they insisted that taxes should not be imposed without colonial representation. The phrase gradually spreads from town to town. No taxation without representation. Simple. Direct. Memorable. People repeat it in taverns. Farmers discuss it beside fences. Merchants whisper it across counting tables. Even children begin hearing adults argue about its meaning. Oddly enough, many colonists protested the Stamp Act by refusing to drink imported beverages at public gatherings, choosing local alternatives instead. Political disagreement sometimes appeared not only in speeches, but also in what people decided to serve at dinner. History occasionally hides inside surprisingly ordinary meals. Your footsteps carry you through Philadelphia, where elegant brick buildings stand beside muddy streets crowded with horses and handcarts. Gentle rain taps against windows while shopkeepers discuss the latest ships arriving from England. Every arrival brings more news. Every letter carries fresh uncertainty. Some British officials remain convinced that resistance will fade. Many colonists believe compromise is still possible. Neither side fully understands how differently the other views the situation. From London's perspective, Parliament possesses the legal authority to govern every part of the empire. From the colonial perspective, local assemblies have managed their own internal affairs for generations. Both arguments possess their own internal logic. Together they create growing tension. You notice something interesting as evening approaches. People who once argued mainly about crops, weather shipping schedules, or church matters now spend long hours debating political philosophy. Can government exist without consent? What rights belong naturally to every person? How much authority should any ruler possess? These are not questions reserved for scholars alone. Blacksmiths discuss them. Farmers debate them. Women exchange opinions while managing households. Young apprentices listen carefully from the corners of busy workshops. Ideas become part of everyday life. One scandalous aside from the period concerns wealthy merchants who publicly condemned British taxes while quietly continuing profitable trade with British suppliers whenever possible. Human nature rarely fits neatly into patriotic legends. People have always balanced principles with practical concerns, sometimes successfully, sometimes awkwardly. Britain eventually repeals the Stamp Act after widespread colonial resistance and economic pressure from British merchants. Bells ring in celebration across several towns. Many colonists breathe easier. Perhaps the crisis has ended. Perhaps everyone has learned an important lesson. Unfortunately, another lesson is about to arrive. Although Parliament removes the Stamp Act, it simultaneously declares that it still holds complete authority to legislate for the colonies in every circumstance. The immediate problem disappears. The deeper disagreement remains. Like glowing embers beneath quiet ashes, the dispute continues waiting. Scholars continue to disagree over whether British leaders genuinely misunderstood colonial opinion, or whether they knowingly accepted the growing risk in order to preserve parliamentary authority. The surviving letters and speeches leave room for more than one interpretation, and the discussion remains lively today. As darkness settles over the Atlantic coastline, candles flicker inside homes from Georgia to New Hampshire. Families finish supper. Children grow sleepy. Dogs curl beside warm fireplaces. Outside, the wind gently stirs tree branches that have witnessed generations come and go. No one yet knows how much these quiet evenings will soon change. The empire still appears vast. The colonies still seem loyal. Peace still feels possible, yet something invisible has shifted. Not armies, not borders, expectations. Once people begin asking difficult questions about power and freedom, those questions rarely disappear. They travel from one generation to the next, carried not by ships alone, but by conversations around simple wooden tables where ordinary people quietly wonder what kind of future their children might inherit. In your ears, the echo changes into the steady murmur of a crowded marketplace. Wooden wagon wheels rumble over uneven streets. A horse snorts impatiently beside a hitching post. Somewhere nearby, a church bell marks another ordinary morning. The scent of beeswax candles mingles with fresh pine boards and the faint sweetness of drying tobacco leaves. Life goes on. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about history. Even while great political storms gather, most people still wake before sunrise, prepare breakfast, repair fences, care for children, and hope for a peaceful evening. Yet beneath these familiar routines, new ideas continue spreading from colony to colony. The repeal of the Stamp Act has offered temporary relief, but trust has become fragile. Parliament still believes it possesses the unquestioned authority to govern the colonies. Many Americans increasingly believe that authority should have clear limits. The disagreement is no longer merely about taxes. It is becoming a debate about the nature of government itself. You find yourself entering a busy print shop in Philadelphia. The room vibrates with activity. Heavy presses creak as sheets of paper emerge one after another. Apprentices hurry between stacks of freshly printed newspapers, while editors argue over headlines. Ink has become almost as powerful as gunpowder. Records confirm that newspapers multiplied rapidly throughout the colonies during the 18th century, creating one of the most politically active reading publics in the Atlantic world. Even those who could not read often gathered in taverns or meeting houses where articles were read aloud. Ideas no longer belonged only to wealthy gentlemen. They belonged to anyone willing to listen. A farmer finishing his day's work might hear the latest editorial while sharing supper with neighbours. A sailor returning from sea could bring rumours from distant ports. A travelling merchant carried not only goods but also stories. Each conversation connected another small piece of an increasingly shared colonial experience. Your fingers brush against the rough wooden counter of a general store. Behind it stand imported cloth cooking pots, candles, books, tea, and simple household tools. Customers examine prices more carefully than before. Money always has a way of making politics feel personal. In 1767, Parliament introduced the Townshend Acts, placing duties on imported goods including glass, paper, paint, lead and tea. Unlike the Stamp Act, these taxes focused largely on imported products rather than printed documents. British officials believed this approach might meet less resistance. Instead, opposition quickly returned. Merchants organised agreements not to import certain British goods. Households adapted their shopping habits. Communities encouraged one another to purchase locally produced items whenever possible. The movement became surprisingly practical. Women played an essential role. Although many could not vote, they exercised enormous influence through household purchasing decisions. Homemade cloth replaced imported textiles in many communities. Sewing circles became quiet acts of political participation. History often remembers famous speeches. It sometimes forgets the steady hands that stitch clothing by candlelight. You wander into one such gathering. The room smells faintly of wool lavender and burning oak. Needles move rhythmically through fabric while conversation flows gently from family matters to public affairs. Nobody raises their voice. Nobody imagines themselves changing history, yet together they already are. One curious footnote from the period reveals that patriotic spinning competitions became popular in several towns. Communities celebrated those who produced the finest homespun cloth, transforming an everyday household skill into a symbol of resistance. Politics occasionally arrived wearing an apron. Meanwhile, another group begins attracting increasing attention: the Sons of Liberty. This loose organisation includes merchants, craftsmen, labourers and local leaders determined to oppose British taxation. Their methods vary widely. Some organise public meetings, others distribute pamphlets, still others stage dramatic demonstrations designed to attract attention. Not every protest remains peaceful. Crowds sometimes intimidate tax collectors. Officials occasionally resign rather than face angry neighbours. The atmosphere grows steadily more tense. You pause outside a customs office where a nervous official watches passers-by through a narrow window. Every unfamiliar face seems suspicious. Every loud conversation feels potentially dangerous. Fear begins working in both directions. British authorities worry about losing control. Colonists worry about losing their rights. Neither side entirely trusts the other. A government decree proves that British troops were stationed in Boston to help maintain order and protect customs officials. From London's perspective, the soldiers represented lawful authority. From the viewpoint of many Boston residents, they represented unwanted occupation. Imagine walking home each evening while armed soldiers patrol familiar streets. Even if no violence occurs, the atmosphere changes. Children become quieter. Shopkeepers watch carefully. Neighbours lower their voices. Every misunderstanding carries greater weight. One scandalous aside tells of soldiers competing with local workers for part-time employment during their off-duty hours. The resulting competition fueled resentment for reasons that had little to do with politics and everything to do with earning enough money to feed a family. History is rarely driven by lofty ideals alone. Ordinary economics often stand quietly in the background. For a while, life continues balancing uneasily between peace and confrontation. Ships still arrive. Markets still open, churches still fill on Sundays, harvests still depend upon weather rather than politics, yet everyone senses that patience is wearing thin. Then comes March 1770. A confrontation in Boston leaves several colonists dead after British soldiers fire into a hostile crowd. Records confirm that 5 civilians lost their lives in what soon became known as the Boston Massacre. The event shocks the colonies. Its meaning, however, becomes almost as important as the tragedy itself. Patriot leaders describe it as proof of British oppression. British officials insist the soldiers acted in self-defense after facing an aggressive mob. Newspapers publish powerful illustrations. Pamphlets circulate widely. Public opinion hardens. Arguments split sharply over exactly what happened during those chaotic moments. Modern historians continue examining eyewitness accounts that often contradict one another, reminding us that memory itself can become another battlefield. You quietly step away from the crowded street and toward the harbour. The tide rises and falls with perfect indifference. Seagulls continue searching for scraps. Fishing boats drift gently against their ropes. Nature seems almost unaware that human relationships have entered dangerous territory. Still, the colonies are not demanding independence. Not yet. Most people continue hoping for reconciliation. They wish to remain loyal British subjects while preserving what they believe are their traditional rights. It is a delicate balance. Increasingly, it becomes impossible to maintain. As another evening settles across New England, candlelight glows behind small windows. Parents tuck children into bed. Printers prepare tomorrow's newspapers. Merchants calculate uncertain accounts. Soldiers stand watch beneath quiet stars. No declaration has been written. No new nation has been born. But the distance between Britain and its colonies is no longer measured only by the Atlantic Ocean. It is measured by trust that grows thinner with every passing season until even the smallest spark may soon illuminate an entirely different future. Your attention settles upon the salty breeze rolling across Boston Harbor. The tide rises quietly beneath rows of wooden ships, whose tall masts sway against a pale winter sky. Rope creaks softly. Gulls cry overhead. Somewhere nearby, the smell of tar-damp timber, fish, and chimney smoke mingles into the familiar scent of one of the busiest ports in North America. Boston has become much more than a prosperous town. It has become an idea. Every merchant, sailor, apprentice, widow, craftsman, and dock worker seems to understand that something unusual is unfolding here, even if nobody can yet describe exactly where events will lead. The years following the Boston Massacre bring moments of calm mixed with fresh disputes. Tension no longer arrives in dramatic waves. Instead, it lingers constantly beneath daily life like a distant storm that never quite disappears beyond the horizon. Parliament still believes that its authority must remain unquestioned. Many colonists believe that liberty cannot survive without meaningful limits on that authority. Neither side wishes to appear weak. That alone makes compromise increasingly difficult. You stroll through narrow streets where shopkeepers greet familiar customers with polite smiles, though conversations now drift quickly toward politics. Newspapers sit folded upon counters beside jars of nails and bolts of cloth. News travels almost as quickly as gossip. Records confirm that in 1773 Parliament passed the Tea Act. Contrary to what many people assume today, the law actually lowered the price of legally imported tea by allowing the British East India Company to sell directly within the colonies. That sounds surprisingly generous. So why did it provoke outrage? Because many colonists believed the lower price concealed a dangerous principle. If they willingly accepted taxed tea, even inexpensive tea, would they also be quietly accepting Parliament's claimed right to tax them whenever it wished? The argument becomes symbolic. The tea itself matters less than what it represents. You pause beside a merchant examining freshly unloaded tea chests stacked neatly along the dock. Their wooden sides are marked with shipping symbols from across the Atlantic. The cargo smells faintly earthy and comforting. Normally such deliveries would promise profitable business. Now they promise controversy. Several colonial ports refuse to unload the shipments at all. Meetings grow larger. Debates last longer. Crowds become increasingly determined. For a moment it feels as though every conversation in Boston ends with the same unanswered question. What happens next? One curious footnote reveals that many colonists continue drinking tea even while protesting British policies. They simply search for locally produced herbal alternatives or imported tea through unofficial channels. Human beings have always found creative ways to preserve familiar comforts while expressing political convictions. Even revolutions pause occasionally for a warm cup of tea. As December arrives, cold winds sweep across the harbour, the days shorten. Frost gathers upon rooftops before sunrise. Yet despite the season, thousands of people gather to discuss the ships carrying taxed tea. You find yourself standing among them. The air feels tense but strangely orderly. Speakers climb onto makeshift platforms. Listeners remove their hats. Questions echo through the crowd. Should the ships return to England? Should the cargo remain untouched? Should someone act before British officials intervene? The hours pass. No agreement satisfies everyone. Then evening falls. A group of men quietly moves toward the harbour. Records confirm that on the night of December the 16th, 1773, dozens of colonists boarded 3 British ships and threw more than 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbour. The action becomes known forever as the Boston Tea Party. Popular imagination often pictures wild chaos. The reality appears rather different. Participants worked with surprising discipline. They damaged the tea but avoided unnecessary destruction of other cargo. Witnesses later remarked upon the unusual orderliness of the operation, One scandalous aside from the event tells of a participant who reportedly attempted to slip some tea into his pocket for personal use. According to later accounts, fellow participants immediately stopped him, insisting that the protest was directed against the tea itself, not an opportunity for theft. Even rebellion maintained certain rules. The harbour slowly fills with floating tea leaves. Cold water carries them toward the shore. The sharp scent of soaked tea drifts across the dark water. Imagine standing silently upon the dock that night. No fireworks, no cheering crowds, only splashing water, breaking crates, cold winter air. Few people realise they are witnessing one of the most famous acts of political protest in history. Britain's response arrives swiftly. Parliament closes Boston Harbour. Massachusetts loses significant self-governing authority. Additional British troops arrive. These measures become known in Britain as the Coercive Acts. Many colonists soon call them the Intolerable Acts. The names alone reveal how differently each side understands the situation. British leaders intend to restore order. Many Americans believe punishment has become tyranny. You continue walking through Boston months later. The harbour feels strangely quiet. Fewer ships arrive. Dock workers struggle to find employment. Merchants count shrinking profits. Families worry about the coming winter. The consequences extend far beyond politics. Entire communities suffer economically. Yet something unexpected also happens. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, Britain's actions inspire sympathy across the colonies. Food supplies and financial assistance begin arriving from distant communities. Virginia sends support. Pennsylvania contributes aid. South Carolina offers assistance. People who had once viewed Boston's troubles as local now begin seeing them as shared. Distance becomes less important. Solidarity quietly grows. A formal resolution from colonial assemblies demonstrates that communication between the colonies expanded rapidly during this period through committees of correspondence. These networks allowed news arguments and proposals to spread with remarkable speed across hundreds of miles. Letters become lifelines. Messengers become essential. Ideas travel faster than armies. Scholars continue debating whether Parliament underestimated the emotional impact of closing Boston Harbour, or whether officials believed firm action would discourage further resistance elsewhere. The historical record supports both interpretations and consensus remains elusive. As another peaceful evening settles over New England, candlelight reflects upon frozen streets. Children sleep beneath thick blankets while parents quietly discuss uncertain futures. The tea has disappeared beneath the harbour waters, yet its memory refuses to sink. Instead, it floats from town to town, carried by newspapers, travellers' sermons, letters, and countless conversations beside warm fireplaces. No declaration has yet been signed. No independence has been proclaimed. Still, after Boston Harbour, many people begin sensing that the path back toward easy reconciliation has grown painfully narrow. The river of history continues flowing forward, and every mile now carries the colonies closer to a moment from which there will be no peaceful return. Your thoughts drift southward, along winding colonial roads where horses carry riders through forests of towering oak and pine. Morning mist hangs gently above quiet rivers. The scent of damp earth rises with the first warmth of daylight, while wagon wheels leave deep tracks in soft ground after an evening rain. The colonies no longer feel like distant neighbours. News now travels with remarkable urgency. Every letter arriving from Boston seems to carry another warning. Every traveller brings another story. Every gathering ends with more questions than answers. The closing of Boston Harbour has accomplished something Britain never intended. Instead of dividing the colonies, it has encouraged them to think of themselves as partners, facing a common challenge. For generations, each colony has guarded its own interests. Virginia has often looked first toward Virginia. Massachusetts has defended Massachusetts. Pennsylvania has pursued Pennsylvania. Yet hardship possesses a curious ability to reshape loyalties. You arrive in Philadelphia during the late summer of 1774. The city hums with activity. Carriages roll across broad streets. Bells echo from church towers. Shopkeepers greet customers while dock workers continue unloading cargo from ships anchored along the Delaware River. Philadelphia feels calmer than Boston. It also feels expectant. Delegates from 12 colonies are beginning to arrive. Some wear elegant coats, others prefer simpler clothing. Some travel hundreds of miles through difficult roads simply to attend a meeting that nobody can fully predict. Records confirm that the First Continental Congress assembled in Philadelphia in September 1774. 56 delegates gathered to discuss a united response to Britain's recent actions. It is an extraordinary moment. Not because they already agree, because they are willing to sit together at all. Imagine entering the meeting hall. Wooden chairs scrape gently across the floor. Candles flicker against polished walls. Papers rustle. Voices remain respectful, though opinions differ sharply. Some delegates still hope complete reconciliation with Britain remains possible. Others believe stronger action has become unavoidable. Nearly everyone understands the seriousness of the moment, yet independence remains a distant thought for many. They seek justice. They seek compromise. They seek recognition of what they believe are their constitutional rights. You quietly take a place near the back of the room. One speaker argues passionately for firmness. Another urges caution. A third reminds everyone that civil war would bring suffering beyond imagination. No one speaks lightly. They know lives may depend upon the decisions made inside these walls. A formal record proves that the Congress approved a Declaration of Rights while also organising an economic boycott of British goods through what became known as the Continental Association. The strategy avoids violence. Instead, it relies upon cooperation. If enough colonists refuse British imports, perhaps economic pressure will persuade Parliament to reconsider. It is a bold experiment. Can ordinary consumers influence an empire? The answer remains uncertain. Outside the meeting hall, daily life continues. Markets remain busy. Children play in narrow streets. Blacksmiths strike glowing iron upon heavy anvils. The smell of roasted meat drifts from nearby kitchens. History always unfolds beside ordinary routines. One curious footnote tells of tavern owners who found themselves serving customers from nearly every colony during the Congress. Accents mixed freely over shared meals. Men who had never expected to meet discovered surprising similarities despite growing up hundreds of miles apart. Sometimes nations begin forming over supper rather than battlefields. As weeks pass, delegates gradually learn to trust one another. Disagreements remain. Personal rivalries certainly exist, yet a larger understanding slowly develops. If Britain acts against one colony today, another colony may stand alone tomorrow. Unity begins replacing isolation. You notice something almost invisible but deeply important. The delegates increasingly speak of the colonies instead of naming each colony separately. Language changes before identity fully changes. Words quietly prepare the future. Meanwhile, Britain receives reports from America with growing concern. Royal officials remain convinced that determined leadership can restore obedience. Additional troops continue arriving. Military supplies increase. Both sides claim they seek peace. Both sides prepare for conflict. The contradiction grows harder to ignore. One scandalous aside concerns certain colonial merchants who secretly violated the boycott while publicly praising it in speeches. Their neighbours did not always appreciate this convenient interpretation of patriotism, and local committees occasionally investigated suspected violations with surprising enthusiasm. Human consistency has never been history's strongest quality. During the autumn and winter, committees of correspondence become increasingly active. Letters cross rivers. Messengers ride muddy roads. Printers work late into the night. Church ministers read political news after Sunday services. Even remote farming communities soon hear about decisions made in Philadelphia. The colonies are slowly becoming a conversation rather than 13 separate voices. For a moment it feels as though compromise may still survive. King George receives petitions. Congress carefully avoids declaring independence. Many colonists continue describing themselves as loyal subjects, asking only for fair treatment. They hope someone in London is listening. Some British politicians indeed urge moderation. Others insist that yielding would weaken parliamentary authority throughout the empire. Arguments divide not only America but Britain itself. Scholars still disagree over whether reconciliation remained realistically possible after the First Continental Congress, or whether events had already gathered too much momentum. Some historians see several missed opportunities for compromise, while others believe mutual distrust had grown beyond repair. As winter settles over the colonies, fireplaces burn longer into the evening. Snow gathers along country roads. Travel becomes slower. Families exchange quiet conversations beneath warm candlelight. Few ordinary people know exactly what the coming spring will bring, yet they sense change approaching. Militia companies quietly increase their training. Local communities begin storing supplies. Powder muskets, blankets, food and tools all become slightly more important than before. No formal declaration announces these preparations. They unfold naturally, almost reluctantly, like neighbours repairing a roof before clouds arrive. The Congress eventually agrees to meet again if Britain refuses to address colonial concerns. It is a simple decision. It'll prove historic, because when those delegates gather again, the world around them will already have changed forever. The peaceful search for compromise has not yet ended. But somewhere beyond the quiet countryside, beyond the frozen rivers and sleeping villages, the first echoes of war are already beginning to stir. For a moment it feels as though spring itself is holding its breath. Frost melts slowly beneath the first warm sunlight. Birds return to familiar branches. Streams begin flowing more freely after the long winter. The countryside appears peaceful, almost untouched by the political storms gathering beyond the horizon. Yet beneath that calm landscape, preparations quietly continue. In barns, muskets are cleaned. In workshops, blacksmiths shape horseshoes and repair wagon wheels that may soon carry soldiers instead of grain. Farmers finish planting crops while wondering whether they will still be home in time for harvest. Life refuses to stop simply because history is approaching. Your footsteps carry you along a narrow road outside the small town of Concord, Massachusetts. The air smells of damp earth, fresh pine, and wood smoke rising from distant chimneys. Everything feels ordinary. Perhaps that is what makes this moment so remarkable. History rarely announces itself with thunder. More often it arrives while someone is feeding chickens or repairing a fence. British military leaders receive reports that colonial militias have been storing weapons and gunpowder around Concord. From their perspective, allowing large quantities of military supplies to remain beyond government control seems increasingly dangerous. The decision is made. A force of British regular soldiers will march from Boston to seize those supplies. The mission is intended to be swift, quiet, efficient. Instead, it becomes legendary. Records confirm that during the night of April 18, 1775, British troops began marching toward Concord under orders to confiscate military stores and, if possible, arrest several prominent colonial leaders. Word, however, travels quickly. Messengers ride through the darkness, knocking on doors, crossing fields, and galloping down lonely roads. Lantern light flickers in farmhouse windows as sleepy families awaken to urgent news. The regulars are coming! Militia members leave warm beds. Some kiss their wives goodbye without knowing whether they will return. Others simply shoulder their muskets and hurry into the cool night air. No one fully understands what the coming sunrise will bring. You follow the gathering militia toward Lexington Green. The morning remains quiet except for distant footsteps and the occasional call of birds welcoming dawn. Across the village, green, disciplined British soldiers approach in neat formation. Red coats stand out vividly against the pale grass. The colonial militia waits. They are fewer in number, less experienced. Many are ordinary farmers, craftsmen and shopkeepers. Neither side truly wants disaster. Both hope the other will step aside. The silence grows heavy. Then everything changes. A single gunshot rings through the cool morning air. Even today nobody knows with certainty who fired first. What follows lasts only minutes. Smoke fills the green, muskets roar. Several colonial militiamen fall. The British continue marching toward Concord. The first blood has been spilled. History remembers it as the shot heard around the world, not because everyone heard it that morning, but because its consequences would echo for centuries. Arguments continue among historians regarding who fired that first shot at Lexington. Eyewitness testimony conflicts sharply, and no agreement has ever been reached despite generations of careful study. Some mysteries refuse to surrender their answers. You continue along the road toward Concord. The countryside now feels strangely alive. Militia companies arrive from neighbouring towns. Church bells ring. Farmers leave ploughs standing in fields. Young men hurry forward carrying powder horns and ammunition. The British succeed in reaching Concord, but many of the military supplies have already been hidden. Their mission is only partially successful. Then comes the return march. Everything changes once again. Instead of facing organised armies on open fields, British soldiers find themselves surrounded by determined militia firing from behind stone walls, trees, fences and buildings. The long road back to Boston becomes exhausting. Every hill may conceal another volley. Every bend in the road brings fresh uncertainty. Records confirm that nearly 300 British soldiers became casualties during the retreat, while colonial losses were significantly lower. The march that began as a routine military expedition ends as something entirely different. War has begun. You stand beside a weathered stone wall overlooking the road. Smoke drifts lazily through the spring air. Birdsong slowly returns after each burst of gunfire. Nature continues its peaceful rhythm while human history changes forever. One curious footnote reveals that some local women followed behind the fighting carrying water, tending the wounded, and helping however they could. Their courage rarely appeared in grand paintings, yet without countless acts of quiet support armies could scarcely continue. Great events always rest upon unseen hands. News spreads with astonishing speed. Horsemen race across colonies. Printers work through the night. Letters travel in every direction. Within days, thousands of militia surround Boston, effectively placing the city under siege. What had begun as scattered protests has become open-armed resistance. Still, many people refuse to believe complete separation from Britain is inevitable. Even after Lexington and Concord, countless colonists hope reconciliation might somehow remain possible. The king, they believe, may yet understand. Parliament may yet compromise. Surely such a terrible conflict can still be avoided. Hope proves remarkably resilient. Meanwhile, the Second Continental Congress prepares to meet in Philadelphia. Delegates travelling toward the city now carry entirely different expectations than they did only months before. They are no longer discussing theoretical rights alone. They are responding to bloodshed. The questions before them have become far more urgent. Who will command the colonial forces? How will supplies be obtained? Can 13 separate colonies fight together? Can they survive if they do? One scandalous aside from the early fighting concerns frightened livestock wandering across roads after being startled by musket fire. Several later accounts describe confused cows and sheep creating unexpected obstacles for both sides, a gentle reminder that even animals occasionally become unwilling participants in human conflict. History has room for unexpected moments. As evening settles across New England, campfires begin glowing around Boston. Militia members wrap themselves in blankets. Some speak confidently of quick victory. Others quietly admit their fears. Most have never imagined fighting the army they once proudly admired. The familiar world has disappeared in a single day. There is no declaration yet, no new nation, only a growing realization that once neighbors begin firing upon one another, returning to the old ways becomes unimaginably difficult. The peaceful roads you walked only hours before now lead toward a future that none of those standing beneath the spring stars can fully see. Your mind settles into the gentle warmth of an early summer morning in Philadelphia. The streets awaken slowly beneath clear skies. Horses pull heavy wagons across cobblestones, polished by decades of use. Shopkeepers sweep dust from their doorways. Fresh bread cools beside open windows, filling the air with a comforting aroma that briefly makes the troubles of the world seem very far away. Yet the city carries a different mood now. Only a year ago, delegates gathered hoping to repair a strained relationship with Britain. Now armed conflict has already begun. Boston remains surrounded. Militia camps spread across the countryside. Families anxiously await letters from sons, brothers and fathers serving with the colonial forces. Nothing feels quite the same. You quietly approach the Pennsylvania State House where the Second Continental Congress continues its work behind thick brick walls. The building appears calm from the outside. Inside, history is wrestling with itself. Records confirm that the Second Continental Congress first met in May 1775, and gradually assumed responsibilities that no previous colonial assembly had ever attempted. It organized military efforts, managed diplomacy, sought supplies, and eventually acted as the central political authority for the colonies. Its members never intended to build a government overnight. Circumstances slowly pushed them there. One of their earliest decisions proves especially important. They appoint George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. The choice surprises some observers. Washington comes from Virginia rather than Massachusetts, where fighting has begun. Yet that very fact carries meaning. His appointment reminds every colony that this struggle belongs to all of them, not merely to New England. You imagine Washington entering the chamber. He stands quietly taller than many around him. His blue military coat is neat but not extravagant. He speaks carefully. He understands the enormous responsibility now resting upon his shoulders. He also understands something else. Leading enthusiastic volunteers is very different from leading a professional army. The task ahead will demand extraordinary patience. Outside the meeting hall, ordinary people continue living ordinary lives. Mothers prepare meals. Children chase one another through narrow streets. Farmers harvest early crops beneath the summer sun. Church bells ring on Sunday mornings just as they always have. History often advances while daily routines quietly endure. Then another remarkable change begins unfolding. More colonists start asking a question that would once have seemed almost impossible. If reconciliation no longer appears likely, what comes next? The answer is no longer obvious. Some still hope the king will intervene against Parliament. Others believe complete independence has become unavoidable. Many remain uncertain. After all, declaring independence would mean rejecting not merely certain taxes, but the authority of one of the most powerful empires on earth. It is a breathtaking step. One curious footnote from this period reveals that public readings of political pamphlets often attracted crowds far larger than expected, because literacy varied widely. Those unable to read simply listened while neighbours shared the latest arguments aloud. In this way, ideas travelled not only through paper, but through voices carried across town squares. Words became shared experiences. Among the many pamphlets circulating through the colonies, one stands above the rest. In January 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense. Its language is direct, simple, powerful. Records confirm that the pamphlet sold extraordinarily well, reaching readers throughout the colonies in numbers almost unheard of for the time. Paine argues that monarchy itself is unreasonable. He insists that America should become an independent republic rather than continue seeking reconciliation. His ideas spread rapidly, not because they're complicated, because ordinary people understand them. You pause inside a modest tavern where travellers discuss the pamphlet over simple meals. One man nods enthusiastically, another shakes his head, a third remains silent, staring thoughtfully into the fire. No one can deny that the conversation has changed. Only months earlier, many debates focused upon rights within the British Empire. Now increasing numbers openly discuss life beyond it. A government record proves that during these months, colonial assemblies gradually began instructing their delegates to support stronger measures, including independence if necessary. Local opinion was evolving, though not everywhere at the same pace. Some colonies embraced the idea quickly. Others hesitated. Human beings rarely reach enormous decisions simultaneously. One scandalous aside concerns printers who rushed unauthorized editions of popular pamphlets into circulation without permission from the original publishers, hoping to profit from extraordinary public demand. Intellectual property disputes, it seems, have rather deep historical roots. Even revolutions could not entirely escape commercial opportunity. Meanwhile, the war continues. The Continental Army struggles with shortages of food, uniforms, tents, blankets, and ammunition. Many soldiers arrive carrying their own muskets. Some lack proper shoes. Others share blankets with fellow soldiers. Washington spends almost as much energy pleading for supplies as preparing military strategy. The army survives through determination as much as organization. Yet despite these hardships, confidence slowly grows. Not confidence that victory will come easily. Confidence that the colonies now possess a purpose larger than individual grievances. The idea of America begins changing from a collection of colonies into something more enduring. Scholars continue debating exactly when the majority of colonists accepted independence as the preferred outcome. Some argue the transformation occurred gradually over many months, while others believe certain dramatic events accelerated public opinion with remarkable speed. Perhaps historical change resembles sunrise. One person notices the first light, another sees only darkness. Then suddenly everyone realizes morning has arrived. As June approaches, delegates once again gather inside the Pennsylvania State House. The atmosphere feels heavier than before. The discussions are longer, the consequences greater. Some understand that whatever decision emerges from these meetings may alter history for centuries. Outside, children continue playing beneath the summer sun, blissfully unaware that the adults inside those brick walls are preparing words that future generations will memorize. The colonies have crossed an invisible threshold. Returning to the old relationship now seems increasingly unlikely. Ahead lies uncertainty. Ahead lies danger. Ahead lies hope. Soon ink upon paper will announce a new nation to the world. But before those famous words can be written, courageous men must first convince themselves that such words are truly necessary. And that may be the hardest decision of all. For a moment it feels as though the entire continent is listening. Warm summer air settles over fields of tall grass. Crickets sing beneath fading daylight. Campfires flicker across the countryside where weary soldiers finish another simple meal of coarse bread-salted meat and whatever fresh food nearby farms can spare. The words declaring independence have now been written, but words alone cannot secure freedom. The hardest part still lies ahead. You quietly leave Philadelphia and travel north toward the scattered camps of the Continental Army. The roads are rough. Wagons struggle through mud after summer storms. Horses move slowly beneath heavy loads of flour, gunpowder blankets, and medical supplies. Every mile reminds you of a difficult truth. Winning independence requires more than courage. It requires food, money, organization, patience. All four remain in painfully short supply. Records confirm that after the Declaration of Independence was approved, Britain committed even greater military resources to crushing the rebellion. Thousands of experienced soldiers crossed the Atlantic supported by one of the world's most powerful navies. The imbalance appears overwhelming. Professional troops face volunteers. A global empire faces 13 young states still learning how to cooperate. Many observers quietly predict that the rebellion cannot possibly survive. You enter an American military camp shortly before sunrise. The smell of wood smoke hangs low above rows of simple canvas tents. Some soldiers are already awake cleaning muskets that have seen years of hard use. Others repair torn clothing with clumsy stitches. A few sit silently staring into small cooking fires while waiting for breakfast. The Continental Army is remarkably diverse. Farmers stand beside lawyers. Carpenters share tents with fishermen. Teachers march beside blacksmiths. Some enlisted for patriotic conviction. Others join for regular pay, however uncertain that payment might become. Many simply hope to protect their families and communities. Washington walks through the camp with steady composure. He knows appearances matter. If the commander seems confident, exhausted soldiers may find strength to continue one more day. If he shows despair, discouragement may spread faster than any enemy attack. Leadership often means carrying hope long after comfort has disappeared. One curious footnote from the early war reveals that musicians played fifes and drums not only during battles, but also to regulate daily routines inside camp. Different melodies signalled waking meals, assembly, and bedtime, creating order amid constant uncertainty. Even armies need a daily schedule. Meanwhile, British forces prepare an enormous campaign centred on New York. Their commanders believe capturing the city will quickly end organised resistance. The strategy appears entirely reasonable. New York possesses an excellent harbour. It serves as a major commercial centre. Its location offers valuable military advantages. You arrive just as thousands of British soldiers land nearby. The sight is astonishing. Long rows of ships fill the harbour. Bright uniforms stretch across open fields. Cannons stand ready. Everything reflects the discipline of a professional army. Records confirm that the British victory during the New York campaign forced Washington into a difficult retreat across New Jersey. For many Americans, the situation appears desperate. The Continental Army shrinks. Enlistments expire. Morale sinks. Some soldiers simply return home. Others remain because leaving now would abandon everything they have already sacrificed. You walk beside the retreating army. Dust rises beneath tired feet. Boots wear thin. Some men wrap rags around their feet after their shoes completely fall apart. Rain soaks blankets already worn from months of use. Still they continue, not because they expect comfort, because they believe stopping would mean surrender. One scandalous aside concerns certain contractors who supplied poor quality food and equipment while charging generous prices to the struggling Continental Congress. Wartime corruption proved almost as old as war itself, creating frustration among soldiers already enduring immense hardship. Human weakness marches beside human courage. As autumn gives way to winter, the war reaches one of its darkest moments. The British occupy New York. The Continental Army appears close to collapse. Many loyal supporters begin wondering whether independence has already failed. Washington understands that remaining inactive may prove fatal. A bold plan slowly forms. On Christmas night in 1776, while many British and Hessian troops expect little military activity during the holiday season, Washington leads his exhausted army across the icy Delaware River. Snow falls, wind cuts through heavy coats. The river itself becomes a formidable obstacle. Boats drift through floating ice while soldiers struggle to maintain silence. Records confirm that the surprise attack at Trenton on December the 26th, 1776, resulted in a significant American victory, capturing hundreds of enemy soldiers and dramatically improving morale throughout the colonies. The battle itself is relatively small compared with many later engagements. Its psychological impact is enormous. Sometimes hope depends less upon size than timing. You stand quietly on the frozen riverbank as dawn begins brightening the eastern sky. The soldiers disappear into the distance. Their footprints remain briefly in the snow before fresh wind begins covering them. History often remembers victories. It less frequently remembers the long nights of doubt that came before them. Arguments continue among military historians regarding just how close the Continental Army came to complete collapse during the winter of 1776. Some believe only extraordinary leadership prevented disaster, while others argue that British strategic mistakes proved equally important. Perhaps both explanations deserve consideration. History rarely belongs to one cause alone. The victory at Trenton is soon followed by another success at Princeton. Confidence slowly returns. Not certainty, simply confidence that survival remains possible. That alone changes everything. As another quiet evening settles over the American countryside, soldiers gather around campfires once more. Someone quietly mends a torn sleeve. Another writes a letter home by candlelight. A young recruit stares upward at countless stars, wondering how many more winters this struggle will require. The war is far from over. Greater hardships still await. Yet the dream declared in Philadelphia has survived its first terrible test. Like a small flame sheltered against a cold winter wind, it continues burning. And sometimes that is enough to carry an entire nation through another uncertain night. Your thoughts drift across the wide Atlantic once more, following the slow movement of great sailing ships, cutting through endless blue water. Their sails swell with steady winds, their wooden hulls groan gently against the rolling sea. Salt fills the air, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the bow creates a sound so constant that it almost becomes a lullaby. Far beyond the battlefields of North America, kings, ministers, admirals, and diplomats are watching the war with growing interest. The struggle has become much larger than Britain and its rebellious colonies. The great powers of Europe see opportunity. Some see revenge. Others see balance. All understand that history may soon change. You quietly enter the candlelit room in Paris where officials gather around polished tables covered with maps. The scent of melted wax and parchment fills the air. Voices remain calm, measured, almost cautious. France remembers its recent defeat in the 7 Years' War. It remembers lost territories. It remembers wounded national pride. Supporting the American cause offers something attractive. Not merely sympathy, strategy. If Britain becomes weakened, France may regain influence across the Atlantic. Records confirm that even before openly joining the war, France secretly supplied the Americans with weapons, gunpowder uniforms, and financial assistance through unofficial channels. These supplies become lifelines. Without them, the Continental Army faces even greater hardship. You return briefly to an American encampment. Fresh muskets arrive. Barrels of powder are unloaded. New uniforms appear, though never in sufficient numbers. Officers understand that many of these resources have travelled astonishing distances. Every successful shipment represents months of planning dangerous sea voyages and careful diplomacy. The war is no longer fought only with armies. It is fought with cargo ships, treaties, and patient negotiation. One curious footnote tells of French volunteers who crossed the Atlantic at their own expense before France officially entered the conflict. Drawn by ideals of liberty, adventure, or personal ambition, they willingly risked everything for a cause that was not originally their own. History often attracts remarkable idealists. Among these volunteers, one young nobleman becomes especially famous, the Marquis de Lafayette. Still in his early 20s, he offers his service to the Continental Army. Washington quickly recognizes both his enthusiasm and his genuine commitment. Their friendship grows into one of the most enduring partnerships of the Revolution. Lafayette is not merely a foreign officer, he becomes a trusted ally. His presence also symbolizes something important. America is no longer entirely alone. Meanwhile, another extraordinary American quietly serves across the ocean. Benjamin Franklin arrives in France carrying neither sword nor military command. Instead, he brings diplomacy. His reputation fascinates French society. His calm intelligence, simple clothing, and practical wisdom create an image that many Europeans find irresistible. Records confirm that Franklin played a central role in securing French recognition of American independence and negotiating the alliance that followed. Sometimes history changes because one person knows exactly what to say. You imagine Franklin attending elegant receptions beneath glittering chandeliers. Music fills grand halls. Crystal glasses catch candlelight. Nobles discuss philosophy while servants quietly move between guests. The setting could hardly seem more different from muddy American battlefields. Yet these conversations may prove just as important as any military victory. Then comes a decisive moment. Following the American victory at Saratoga in late 1777, France reaches a crucial conclusion. The rebellion may actually succeed. Records confirm that in 1778 France formally recognized the United States and entered the war as its ally. Everything changes. Britain must now fight not only in North America but across oceans. French warships challenge British naval dominance. French armies prepare for wider conflict. The revolution becomes an international war. You stand beside a busy French naval harbour. Shipwrights hammer fresh timber into place. Cannons are loaded aboard towering warships. Sailors climb rigging with astonishing speed. The smell of tar, salt water, and freshly cut oak fills the morning air. Across Europe, governments watch carefully. Spain soon joins the conflict against Britain, though pursuing its own strategic goals rather than formally recognizing American independence at first. The Dutch Republic eventually becomes involved as well. Britain now faces multiple enemies across several continents. The balance of power begins shifting. One scandalous aside concerns spies operating in nearly every major port. Merchants, diplomats, sailors, and even servants sometimes passed valuable information between competing governments. Not every battle was fought with muskets. Some unfolded quietly through whispered conversations behind closed doors. Secrets became another kind of weapon. Back in America, Washington recognizes that French assistance offers hope but not immediate victory. The Continental Army still lacks adequate food. Pay remains inconsistent. Disease continues spreading through crowded camps. Winter always seems to arrive too soon, yet morale gradually improves. The soldiers now believe they are part of something larger than a lonely rebellion. They belong to an alliance. That knowledge strengthens determination. Scholars continue debating whether American independence could realistically have been achieved without French military and financial support. Some argue victory would have been nearly impossible. Others suggest Britain's own political divisions and logistical challenges might eventually have produced a similar outcome. The discussion remains lively because history rarely offers simple answers. Perhaps success required every one of these circumstances together. As another evening settles over both Europe and America, candles burn inside royal palaces, humble farmhouses, military tents, and diplomatic residences. Thousands of people who will never meet one another unknowingly shape the same story. A sailor steering through rough Atlantic seas, a diplomat signing careful agreements, a farmer supplying grain, a soldier standing watch through another cold night. Each contributes a small piece. Together they slowly transform the course of history. The dream born in Philadelphia has now crossed the ocean. Soon, with powerful friends standing beside it, that dream will move toward the final campaigns that decide whether independence becomes permanent reality or remains only a brave and beautiful hope. For a moment it feels as though the long years of struggle have become woven into everyday life. The sound of marching boots no longer surprises the villages they pass through. Campfires glow almost every evening somewhere beyond the hills. Blacksmiths continue repairing broken wagon wheels, bent horseshoes, and worn musket parts with quiet determination. Even the scent of smoke drifting across the countryside has become strangely familiar. War has a curious way of changing what people consider ordinary. What once seemed temporary gradually becomes routine. Children who were very young when fighting began now struggle to remember a peaceful world. You continue your gentle journey through the final years of the Revolution. The conflict stretches across forests, rivers, coastal towns, and distant frontiers. Neither side possesses enough strength to deliver one decisive victory. Instead, campaigns rise and fall like the changing seasons. The Continental Army survives. The British Army remains formidable. The outcome still refuses to reveal itself. Records confirm that by the early 1780s, British military strategy shifted increasingly toward the southern colonies. Officials believed stronger loyalist support there might help restore royal authority while dividing the revolutionary movement. At first, the strategy shows promise. Important ports fall under British control. Several successful campaigns strengthen confidence. Yet holding territory proves much harder than capturing it. You quietly walk beside a dusty southern road where exhausted soldiers move beneath the hot afternoon sun. Cicadas sing loudly from nearby trees. Sweat darkens wool uniforms never designed for such oppressive summer heat. The southern campaign demands extraordinary endurance. Battles are followed by long marches. Victories are often followed by setbacks. Small communities find themselves changing hands more than once. Families learn to live with uncertainty. Neighbours sometimes choose different sides. The revolution becomes deeply personal. For many civilians, survival matters far more than politics. One curious footnote from the Southern campaign tells of women who secretly passed information between Patriot forces by hiding written messages inside sewing baskets, loaves of bread, or carefully stitched clothing. Ordinary household objects occasionally carried extraordinary importance. History often whispers through unexpected places. Meanwhile, Washington continues watching every development with careful patience. He understands that destroying the British army outright may be impossible. Instead, preserving his own army becomes the greater priority. As long as the Continental Army survives, so does the Revolution. This strategy demands remarkable self-discipline. It means avoiding unnecessary risks. It means accepting retreats when pride would prefer battle. It means thinking not merely about tomorrow, but about years ahead. Great commanders sometimes win by refusing battles as much as by fighting them. You pause beside Washington's headquarters one quiet evening. Inside, maps cover rough wooden tables. Candles burn late into the night. Messengers arrive carrying reports from distant commanders. Every decision balances hope against caution. Every mistake may cost hundreds of lives. Leadership often appears lonely. Far away, French commanders are making similar calculations. The alliance formed years earlier now begins producing its greatest military opportunity. French naval forces increase their activity along the American coast. Coordination between Allied commanders steadily improves. The possibility of trapping a major British army slowly emerges. Records confirm that in 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis established defensive positions at Yorktown, Virginia, believing support from the Royal Navy would protect his army if necessary. Seems a reasonable decision. Then events begin moving with astonishing speed. Washington and French General Rochambeau secretly coordinate an ambitious campaign. Instead of attacking New York as many expect, Allied forces march south towards Virginia. The movement is carefully concealed. British commanders remain uncertain about the Allies' true intentions until it is too late. You imagine the long march. Columns of soldiers stretch for miles beneath the late summer sun. Drums maintain steady rhythm. Dust rises beneath thousands of feet. Farmers pause from harvesting crops to watch the remarkable procession pass. American and French troops march together. Different languages, different uniforms, one shared objective. At sea, another crucial development unfolds. Records confirm that the French fleet defeated the British Navy during the Battle of the Chesapeake, preventing British ships from reaching Cornwallis at Yorktown. The victory lasts only a few hours. Its consequences last centuries. Without naval support, the British Army finds itself isolated. The trap quietly closes. One scandalous aside from the Yorktown campaign concerns officers from both armies who occasionally exchanged remarkably polite correspondence, even while preparing for fierce combat. Formal courtesy often survived alongside bitter conflict, reminding us that 18th century warfare followed customs very different from many later wars. Civil behaviour and deadly struggle sometimes existed side by side. You arrive outside Yorktown as autumn colours begin spreading across the countryside. Trees glow with shades of gold and crimson. Fresh breezes carry the scent of fallen leaves. Yet beneath this peaceful landscape, artillery positions gradually surround the town. Cannons are carefully placed. Trenches move steadily closer. Night after night, Allied soldiers dig while trying to avoid enemy fire. The siege becomes a contest of patience. Every day narrows British options. Every night strengthens Allied positions. Arguments continue among military historians regarding whether Cornwallis could realistically have escaped before the siege tightened completely, or whether circumstances had already made his position impossible. The evidence supports several interpretations, ensuring the discussion remains active. Eventually, the inevitable moment arrives. British resistance weakens. Supplies diminish. Relief never comes. Records confirm that on October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered his army at Yorktown. The ceremony is solemn rather than triumphant. Thousands of soldiers lay down their weapons. Bands play slow military music. The fighting has not officially ended. Yet everyone senses that something irreversible has happened. You stand quietly at the edge of the field. No fireworks burst overhead. No crowds celebrate wildly. Only weary men breathe deeply after years of hardship. Some think of home. Others remember friends who never reached this day. Many simply feel exhausted. The road to independence has been painfully long. Still, one final challenge remains. Battles may decide military victory. Peace must now be secured across negotiating tables an ocean away, and sometimes that task proves every bit as difficult as winning a war. Your thoughts drift gently away from the quiet fields around Yorktown and follow the slow movement of ships crossing the Atlantic once again. Their sails catch steady winds beneath broad autumn skies. The sea seems endless calm one day and restless the next, reminding you that even after the guns begin to fall silent, the journey toward lasting peace is far from complete. Victory on the battlefield does not automatically become peace on paper. The surrender at Yorktown has transformed the military situation, but Britain still possesses armies, fleets and colonies across the globe. The war has become politically difficult, financially exhausting, and deeply unpopular for many in Britain, yet no official agreement has ended the conflict. For a little while the world waits. You quietly enter London, where members of Parliament debate beneath high ceilings lit by hundreds of candles. Outside, horse-drawn carriages rumble over damp streets. Shopkeepers continue serving customers. Children play in narrow alleys. Life continues here as well. Many ordinary British families have grown weary of a conflict that seems increasingly expensive with uncertain rewards. Some argue that the colonies should be brought back under royal authority at almost any cost. Others believe the struggle has already consumed enough lives and treasure. Governments, like families, eventually reach moments when continuing an argument becomes harder than finding a compromise. Records confirm that after Yorktown, political support for continuing the war declined sharply within Britain. Changes in government opened the door to serious peace negotiations with American representatives. The battlefield has spoken. Now diplomacy must speak. Your footsteps carry you into a comfortable room in Paris where negotiators gather around polished tables covered with carefully prepared documents. The scent of wax parchment and fresh ink fills the quiet chamber. No cannons roar here, no drums beat. Yet every sentence written inside this room carries enormous weight. Representing the United States are Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, John Jay, and several other experienced diplomats. They understand that military victory can quickly lose meaning if peace terms fail to protect American independence. Patience becomes another kind of courage. Every word matters. Every phrase may influence generations yet unborn. A diplomatic record confirms that negotiations lasted many months as representatives discussed boundaries, fishing rights, debts, prisoners, and countless practical questions that accompany the birth of a nation. History often celebrates dramatic declarations. It sometimes forgets the painstaking conversations that follow. You imagine Benjamin Franklin quietly reviewing another draft by candlelight. His spectacles rest low upon his nose. Outside, Paris hums softly beneath the evening sky. Inside, each correction upon the page represents another careful step toward peace. One curious footnote reveals that Franklin remained enormously popular among many French citizens throughout his stay. His plain clothing and practical manner stood in sharp contrast to the elaborate fashions often seen at court, creating an image of modest wisdom that fascinated European society. Sometimes personality itself becomes diplomacy. Meanwhile, back in America, the Continental Army still waits. Soldiers remain in camp. Officers continue organizing supplies. No one knows exactly when they may finally return home. Years of sacrifice have created both pride and exhaustion. Many soldiers have not received full pay. Others worry about supporting their families after the war. Washington understands that winning peace requires preserving discipline until the very end. One scandalous aside concerns rumors that some frustrated officers considered dramatic action against Congress because of unpaid wages and uncertain pensions. Washington personally addressed the growing unrest with remarkable restraint, helping prevent a dangerous political crisis before it could deepen. Leadership sometimes means calming friends rather than defeating enemies. The negotiations finally reached their conclusion. Records confirm that the Treaty of Paris was signed in September 1783. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation gained generous territorial boundaries stretching westward to the Mississippi River. Fishing rights were acknowledged. Prisoners would be released. The long war had officially come to an end. Imagine hearing that news arrive in a small American town. Church bells begin ringing. Neighbors embrace one another. Some quietly wipe tears from their eyes. Others simply stand in thoughtful silence. The celebration is joyful yet deeply reflective. Almost every community has suffered losses. Nearly every family knows someone who never returned. Freedom has carried a profound cost. You slowly walk through one such village as evening approaches. Children laugh while chasing one another across open fields. Farmers begin preparing autumn harvests without wondering whether armies will soon march through their land. Merchants reopen familiar trade routes. The smell of fresh bread once again fills village streets more strongly than the smell of gunpowder. Peace has its own gentle fragrance. Still, enormous challenges remain. The colonies have won independence. Now they must learn how to govern themselves together. Victory has removed one problem while revealing many others. How should debts be paid? How much authority should the national government possess? How can 13 independent states cooperate without losing their own identities? The answers are far from obvious. Scholars continue debating whether the peace settlement granted the United States more favourable terms than Britain might have offered under different military circumstances. Some argue the treaty reflected exceptional diplomatic skill. Others believe Britain simply wished to conclude an increasingly costly global conflict. Both perspectives continue attracting thoughtful support. As another peaceful night settles across the young republic, campfires burn for perhaps the last time beside military tents. Some soldiers quietly pack their belongings. Others stare into glowing embers, reluctant to believe the fighting has truly ended. Washington himself prepares for another extraordinary decision. Rather than holding on to military power, he intends to surrender his commission and return home. The gesture astonishes many observers around the world. A victorious commander willingly stepping away from authority is far less common than history sometimes remembers. The revolution has produced not only a new country, it has also created an opportunity to demonstrate that power may be surrendered voluntarily rather than seized permanently. That example will soon become one of the young nation's greatest achievements. For now, however, the roads grow quieter. The drums fade, the ships carry fewer soldiers, and after 8 long years, the sound most people welcome above all others is the simple, peaceful silence of war, finally coming to an end. For a moment it feels as though peace itself has become a new and unfamiliar companion. The roads are quieter now. Muskets are stacked away inside barns instead of carried across battlefields. The sharp scent of gunpowder gradually gives way to the comforting aroma of fresh-cut hay. Warm bread and wood smoke drifting from family hearths. The war has ended. The celebration has begun. But building a nation proves to be a very different challenge from winning one. You continue your gentle walk through the young United States where people are slowly discovering that freedom brings responsibilities no declaration could fully explain. The 13 states have achieved independence. They have not yet learned how to govern together effectively. For years they fought common enemy. Now they must solve common problems. Without one, records confirm that after the Revolutionary War, the United States operated under the Articles of Confederation, a system that intentionally gave most political authority to the individual states, while limiting the power of the national government. At first, this arrangement seems sensible. Many Americans remain deeply suspicious of strong central authority. After all, resisting distant government has been one of the revolution's defining causes. Why replace one powerful government with another? The concern is understandable. Yet practical difficulties soon appear. You enter a busy marketplace where merchants from different states negotiate prices for grain, livestock, cloth and tools. Business should feel easier after peace. Instead, confusion often follows. Different states issue different currencies. Trade regulations vary widely. Debts accumulate. Congress struggles to raise revenue because it cannot directly collect taxes. Every important decision requires patient negotiation among governments that frequently disagree. The new republic possesses independence. It lacks efficiency. A government record demonstrates that Congress repeatedly faced financial shortages during the years following the war, making it difficult to pay debts, support military forces, or respond quickly to national problems. Good intentions alone cannot fund a government. You pause beside a small tavern where travellers exchange stories from distant states. A merchant from Massachusetts complains about trade. A farmer from Virginia worries about declining prices. A craftsman from Pennsylvania wonders whether stronger national leadership might actually be useful. Nobody has perfect answers. Everyone has opinions. One curious footnote from the period reveals that some states printed so much paper money to ease financial pressures that inflation became a serious concern. In certain places, the value of currency shifted so quickly that yesterday's prices scarcely resemble today's. Economics has always found creative ways to surprise people. Meanwhile, another problem quietly grows. Veterans return home expecting stability. Instead, many discover heavy debts, difficult harvests, and uncertain employment. Some lose farms they can no longer afford. Others become frustrated by taxes imposed by state governments, already struggling with their own financial burdens. The revolution has promised liberty. It has not eliminated hardship. Then comes one of the young republic's greatest warnings. In western Massachusetts, farmers facing debt and economic distress begin organized protests. Courts become targets because they authorize property seizures. The demonstrations eventually grow into armed resistance. Records confirm that Shays' rebellion erupted during 1786 and 1787, alarming political leaders throughout the United States. The rebellion is eventually suppressed. Its impact extends far beyond Massachusetts. Many Americans begin asking a difficult question. If the government cannot maintain order within its own borders, How secure is the new republic? You stand quietly outside a country courthouse. The morning air carries the scent of wet leaves after overnight rain. Farmers gather in uneasy conversation. Local officials exchange worried glances. Nobody wishes to see another war. Yet everyone understands that unresolved problems rarely disappear on their own. One scandalous aside from the period concerned speculators who purchased unpaid soldiers' government certificates for only a fraction of their value, betting they would someday become worth much more. Some veterans accepted desperately low offers simply because their families needed immediate food and shelter. History often rewards patience. Unfortunately, hunger rarely allows people the luxury of waiting. The growing uncertainty encourages many national leaders to reconsider the structure of government. George Washington watches developments with increasing concern. James Madison studies political systems carefully. Alexander Hamilton argues passionately that the nation requires stronger institutions capable of addressing national problems. Others remain cautious. They remember exactly why the revolution began. No one wishes to recreate the kind of concentrated authority they had only recently rejected. Finding balance becomes the central challenge. How can government become strong enough to function without becoming too strong to trust? It is a question that still echoes today. In 1787, delegates gather once again in Philadelphia. Officially, they intend to revise the Articles of Confederation. Quietly, many suspect much larger changes may become necessary. The city welcomes familiar faces. Some men who once debated independence now debate the future of the republic itself. The atmosphere differs from earlier meetings. The immediate danger of war has passed. The responsibility of peace has arrived. A council record proves that delegates agreed to conduct much of their discussion in private, allowing frank debate without constant public scrutiny. Closed windows help preserve confidentiality. So did locked doors. Inside disagreement flourished. Large states and small states argued over representation. Northern and southern interests frequently collided. Nearly every major issue demanded compromise. Scholars continue debating whether the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation were inevitable, or whether patient reforms might have solved many problems without replacing the entire system. Historians remain divided because both possibilities find support within the surviving evidence. Perhaps history rarely offers only one workable path. As another evening settles over Philadelphia, candles glow inside the meeting hall long after darkness fills the streets. Outside, ordinary citizens continue their evening routines. Families gather for supper. Children grow sleepy. The city rests peacefully. Inside those quiet brick walls, however, a new blueprint for government is slowly taking shape. The revolution has won independence. Now the republic must decide how freedom itself will be preserved for generations still waiting to be born. Your attention drifts towards another peaceful summer morning. Dew rests upon fresh grass, while the first sunlight touches church steeples, courthouse roofs, and quiet village greens. Somewhere in the distance a bell rings with its familiar steady rhythm. The scent of wildflowers mixes gently with smoke from breakfast fires, creating an atmosphere that feels calm, hopeful, and wonderfully ordinary. The Constitution has now been written. After long debates and careful compromise, enough states agree to ratify it. A stronger national government slowly begins its work. George Washington becomes the first president of the United States. The young republic, still uncertain in many ways, finally possesses a more stable foundation. Yet something else is quietly beginning to grow alongside the government itself. A tradition, a memory, a shared day of celebration. Records confirm that even before the revolution officially ended, many communities had already begun commemorating the anniversary of July 4th, with speeches, church services, military displays, public dinners, and joyful gatherings. The celebration was never only about fireworks. It was about remembrance. You stroll into a small town preparing for one of these early Independence Day observances. Children decorate fences with ribbons. Shopkeepers hang simple banners above their doors. Families spread blankets beneath shade trees where neighbours will soon gather. Everything feels less grand than modern celebrations. Yet perhaps it feels more personal. Everyone seems to know everyone else. The entire town participates. A local minister prepares remarks. The village band tunes its instruments. Veterans of the Revolution greet one another with quiet smiles. Some carry visible scars. Others carry memories no one else can see. The Declaration itself becomes the centerpiece. A respected citizen stands before the assembled crowd and slowly reads its words aloud. Many listeners know portions by heart. Others hear certain passages with fresh emotion every year. The reading reminds them not merely of what happened, it reminds them why it happened. A civic record demonstrates that public readings of the Declaration became a central feature of many Independence Day celebrations during the early Republic, reinforcing common ideals across communities both large and small. Words written in one city gradually become the shared inheritance of an entire nation. You notice the audience listening with remarkable attention. Farmers remove their hats. Children become unusually quiet. Mothers gently comfort restless toddlers while continuing to listen. Even passing travellers pause to hear familiar phrases carried across the warm afternoon air. History becomes something spoken together rather than remembered alone. One curious footnote reveals that cannon salutes often accompanied early Independence Day festivities, though the number of shots sometimes varied according to local custom or the number of states in the Union. The booming echoes reminded listeners that the nation had been secured through sacrifice as well as celebration. The sound must have travelled for miles. After the formal ceremonies come simpler pleasures. Long wooden tables filled with roasted meats, fresh vegetables, homemade bread, fruit pies, and cool drinks prepared by families throughout the community. Neighbours who spent most of the year working separately now sit together beneath open skies. Conversations drift from politics, to harvests from children, to weather from old battles, to hopes for the future. Celebration strengthens community. That may be its greatest purpose. You quietly join one of the tables. The smell of baked apples, fresh butter, and smoked ham fills the gentle summer air. Laughter rises naturally. Musicians begin playing lively tunes. Young couples dance upon open grass while older veterans watch with quiet satisfaction. Some smile broadly. Others simply seem grateful that peaceful gatherings have become possible once again. One scandalous aside from several early celebrations concerns competitive drinking contests that occasionally became far more enthusiastic than local ministers appreciated. Patriotic enthusiasm sometimes proved difficult to separate from ordinary human enjoyment, much to the embarrassment of respectable town leaders the following morning. Even national holidays have always possessed a playful side. As the years pass, Independence Day slowly spreads across the growing republic. New states adopt familiar customs. Small differences appear from one region to another. Coastal towns celebrate with ships decorated in colourful flags. Frontier settlements organise community picnics. Large cities hold grand parades. Tiny villages gather beneath ancient oak trees. The setting changes. The purpose remains remarkably consistent. Remember the past. Celebrate the present. Hope for the future. You walk through Philadelphia once again, where larger crowds now fill broad streets every 4th of July. Bands perform stirring music. Veterans march proudly despite advancing age. School children carry banners painted with patriotic slogans. The atmosphere blends gratitude with optimism. The nation remains young. Its confidence grows steadily. Scholars continue discussing how much these early Independence Day celebrations shaped American national identity, compared with schools, churches, newspapers, and local governments. Many historians believe the annual ritual provided a unique opportunity for people from different backgrounds to remember a common story together. Perhaps traditions quietly accomplish what laws alone cannot. They create belonging. As afternoon gradually softens into evening, families spread blankets across grassy hillsides overlooking nearby towns. Children wait with growing excitement. Lanterns begin appearing one by one. Then slowly fireworks climb into the darkening sky. The first bursts are modest by modern standards. Simple colours, brief flashes, soft clouds of drifting smoke. Yet to those watching they seem magnificent. Each bright spark reflects not only celebration but memory, a reminder that freedom, however imperfect, had been won through years of extraordinary perseverance. The older veterans look upward in thoughtful silence. Perhaps they remember cold camps, muddy roads, and friends who never returned. The younger children know only the beauty above them. Both experiences belong to the same holiday. The nation has survived its uncertain beginning. Now it begins creating traditions capable of carrying its story across generations. And with every passing 4th of July, those traditions grow just a little stronger, binding countless ordinary lives into one continuing national memory. Your thoughts wander westward beneath a wide blue sky where long rivers shimmer in the afternoon sun and endless forests gradually give way to rolling prairies. The air carries the scent of fresh grass, wildflowers, and distant campfires. Wagon wheels leave slow tracks across dusty roads as families search for new beginnings beyond the familiar horizon. The United States has survived its uncertain birth. Now it begins to grow. Each passing decade brings new states, new communities, and new generations who know the revolution only through stories told by parents and grandparents. The 4th of July changes with them. It remains the nation's birthday. Its meaning quietly expands. Records confirm that during the early 19th century, the United States experienced rapid territorial growth, population increases, and westward migration. As settlements spread farther from the Atlantic coast, Independence Day became one of the few traditions shared across an increasingly vast country. Distance no longer prevented celebration. Even isolated frontier communities found ways to mark the occasion. You arrive at a small settlement beside a winding river somewhere beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Only a handful of wooden buildings stand together. A blacksmith shop, a church, a general store, several cabins. The settlement is young. Its people are hopeful. On the morning of July 4th, work pauses. Families gather beneath a large oak tree near the village centre. There is no grand military parade, no orchestra, no elaborate display. Instead, neighbours bring homemade food, simple decorations and stories. Sometimes simplicity carries the deepest meaning. Children born on the frontier listen as elderly veterans describe distant battles fought before those children were even imagined. The stories become bridges between generations. History passes from voice to voice rather than from book to book. A civic record demonstrates that public orations remained among the most important features of Independence Day throughout the first half of the 19th century. Communities often invited respected speakers to reflect upon the nation's founding, its achievements, and its future responsibilities. The speeches were rarely identical. Each generation emphasized different themes. Some celebrated opportunity, others stressed sacrifice. Many reminded listeners that liberty required constant care rather than permanent certainty. You sit quietly among the crowd while one local schoolteacher delivers the annual address. His words are calm, measured, thoughtful. He speaks not only about famous leaders, but also about ordinary families who built farms, schools, churches, and businesses across the expanding nation. Freedom, he suggests, lives most fully in everyday life. The audience nods gently. Many understand exactly what he means. One curious footnote from this era reveals that some Independence Day celebrations featured unusual athletic contests, including climbing greased poles, foot races, log sawing competitions, and friendly shooting matches. Winning mattered far less than laughing together after months of demanding frontier work. Even hard lives welcome moments of play. As the decades continue, canals, steamboats, and eventually railroads reshape American life. Travel becomes easier, communication grows faster, newspapers spread national news further than ever before. Communities separated by hundreds of miles begin sharing remarkably similar holiday customs. You board a steamboat travelling along the Mississippi River. Its great paddle wheel beats steadily against muddy water. Passengers gather on deck beneath fluttering flags, while musicians perform cheerful tunes. The river itself feels alive with movement. Boats carry settlers westward. Merchants transport goods. Families pursue opportunities unimaginable only a generation earlier. The 4th of July accompanies them. Everywhere new towns appear, Independence Day soon follows. One scandalous aside from several rapidly growing river towns concerns enthusiastic fireworks displays that occasionally ignited nearby barns or rooftops, prompting embarrassed organizers to discover that patriotic excitement and fire safety required rather careful balance. Celebrations sometimes carried unexpected consequences. Yet beneath the growing optimism, difficult questions also become harder to ignore. The nation continues expanding. So does disagreement. Different regions increasingly disagree over tariffs, banking, political power, and most profoundly slavery. The ideals proclaimed in the Declaration remain deeply inspiring. Applying those ideals equally proves far more complicated. Some speakers on Independence Day praise national unity. Others quietly remind audiences that many Americans remain excluded from the promises celebrated each July. The holiday begins carrying multiple meanings at once: pride, hope, reflection, unfinished responsibility. You pause in a bustling northern city where thousands gather for an impressive parade. Military veterans march proudly. Fire companies display polished equipment. School children carry colourful banners. Bands fill broad streets with lively music. The atmosphere feels joyful. Only a few hundred miles away, another community marks the same holiday in a very different way. The United States remains one nation. Its experiences are becoming increasingly diverse. A formal government report proves that Congress officially recognized Independence Day as a federal holiday in 1870. Though celebrations had flourished for generations beforehand, official recognition simply acknowledged what ordinary Americans had already practiced for nearly a century. The people created the tradition first. The government honored it later. Arguments continue among historians regarding whether the expanding popularity of Independence Day reflected growing national unity, or whether it sometimes concealed deep political divisions beneath festive ceremonies. Evidence supports both interpretations because celebration and disagreement frequently existed side by side. Perhaps that is one reason the holiday endured. It welcomed both gratitude and conversation. As evening approaches across the growing nation, fireworks begin appearing from one horizon to the next. Tiny frontier villages launch modest displays. Large eastern cities illuminate entire skylines. Ships anchored in busy harbours answer with bright signal lights. Across mountains, rivers, forests, and open plains, countless Americans look upward at the same summer sky. Some remember the revolution. Others think about tomorrow's harvest. Children simply marvel at the brilliant colours. The nation has become far larger than anyone gathered in Philadelphia could have imagined. Its population has multiplied. Its territory has expanded. Its confidence has grown. Yet its greatest test still waits quietly beyond the horizon. Soon the meaning of Independence Day itself will be challenged by a conflict unlike any the Republic has ever known. The celebration of freedom will be forced to confront the painful question of whose freedom has truly been secured. Your mind drifts into another warm July evening. Fireflies float lazily above quiet fields, while the last golden light settles across church steeples, courthouse squares, and white wooden fences. Somewhere nearby, children laugh as they chase one another across freshly cut grass. The smell of charcoal smoke and sweet summer corn fills the air. It feels peaceful. Yet beneath that peaceful sky, the nation is changing in ways that few people fully understand. The United States has grown larger, wealthier, and more confident. It has also become more divided. Questions that once seemed possible to postpone now demand answers. Different states hold different visions of the country's future. Economic interests increasingly collide. Political arguments become sharper. Most painful of all, the institution of slavery continues to divide the nation despite the ideals proclaimed nearly a century earlier. The words of the Declaration remain admired. Their meaning is fiercely debated. Records confirm that throughout the decades before the Civil War, Americans from many different viewpoints quoted the Declaration of Independence to support completely opposing political arguments. The same document inspired very different conclusions. History often works that way. Great words invite continual interpretation. You quietly walk through a 4th of July gathering during the 1850s. Patriotic banners flutter in the warm breeze. Bands perform familiar marches. Veterans of earlier wars receive respectful applause. Children wave small flags with excitement. At first glance, everything appears unchanged. Listen more carefully. The conversations feel different. Some families discuss expanding westward. Others debate new laws. Still others speak cautiously about growing tensions between North and South. The holiday remains joyful. It also carries quiet unease. One curious footnote from this period reveals that Independence Day speeches sometimes lasted 2 or even 3 hours. Modern audiences might struggle to imagine listening that long beneath the summer sun, yet many communities considered such addresses among the most anticipated events of the entire year. Patience, it seems, was once an important civic virtue. Then in 1861, the conflict everyone hoped to avoid finally arrives. The Civil War begins. Americans who once celebrated the 4th of July together now find themselves wearing different uniforms. Brothers fight brothers. Neighbours confront neighbours. Entire communities are divided. The familiar holiday suddenly becomes far more complicated. You stand beside a quiet town square where preparations for July 4th continue despite the war. The decorations remain beautiful. The music still plays, yet many familiar faces are absent. Young men have marched away. Families wait anxiously for letters. Empty chairs at dinner tables speak more loudly than words. A military record demonstrates that both the Union and the Confederacy held patriotic celebrations during the Civil War, each believing it represented the true continuation of the nation's founding principles. Both claimed the legacy of the Revolution. Neither doubted its own conviction. The tragedy lies partly in that certainty. One scandalous aside concerns travelling entertainers who occasionally exaggerated battlefield victories while performing before eager audiences, only for newspapers arriving days later to reveal a rather different version of events. Rumours often travelled much faster than reliable information. Human optimism sometimes outruns the truth. You continue your journey to Washington during the darkest years of the war. Hospitals care for wounded soldiers. Government offices remain busy long after sunset. The city feels exhausted, yet determination endures. President Abraham Lincoln frequently reflects upon the meaning of the Declaration of Independence. He believes its promise extends beyond the political separation from Britain. He sees it as a statement about human equality that the nation has not yet fully honoured. Records confirm that Lincoln repeatedly described the Declaration as expressing principles intended for all people, rather than only for the generation that wrote it. The holiday gradually acquires another layer of meaning. Freedom must not merely be celebrated, it must continue expanding. You quietly imagine a 4th of July after the war has ended. Veterans gather once more. Some walk with canes. Others carry lasting injuries. Many carry memories impossible to describe. The nation celebrates survival. It also mourns extraordinary loss. Families who once stood on opposite sides now attempt the slow work of reconciliation. Healing proves more difficult than victory. One curious footnote reveals that in many towns newly planted trees became part of post-war Independence Day ceremonies, symbolizing hope that future generations might grow together more peacefully than the previous one. Trees, unlike politics, possess remarkable patience. As the 19th century continues, millions of immigrants arrive from across the world. Many celebrate their first 4th of July shortly after reaching American shores. For them, the holiday becomes both an introduction and an invitation. Citizenship is not merely legal, it is cultural. Joining the celebration helps newcomers feel connected to a story already nearly 100 years old. Parades grow larger, fireworks become more elaborate, public parks fill with enormous crowds. The nation continues changing while preserving familiar traditions. Scholars continue debating whether the Civil War permanently transformed the meaning of Independence Day by shifting greater attention toward universal liberty rather than independence alone. Many historians believe the war fundamentally deepened public understanding of the holiday, though opinions naturally differ. Perhaps every generation inherits the 4th of July and quietly reshapes it, not by abandoning the past, by adding another chapter. As evening settles across America once again, fireworks bloom above rivers, farms, growing cities, and quiet villages. Children gaze upward with the same wonder their grandparents once felt. Older listeners remember stories passed down through their own families. The celebration has survived revolution. It has survived civil war. It has survived sorrow. Each generation discovers something slightly different within the familiar holiday. Yet one idea continues shining beneath every changing custom. Liberty is never simply inherited. It must always be remembered, examined, protected, and renewed. That quiet lesson travels forward with every passing Independence Day, waiting patiently for the generations still to come. Your attention slowly follows the gentle sound of a brass band drifting through a quiet neighborhood on a bright July morning. Sunlight reflects from neatly polished instruments, while children wave small flags from shaded sidewalks. The scent of fresh lemonade, grilled food, blooming roses and warm summer grass fills the peaceful air. The nation has entered as a new century. Electric lights begin replacing lanterns. Automobiles gradually appear beside horse-drawn wagons. Telephones connect distant voices. Airplanes once unimaginable slowly become reality. Technology changes with astonishing speed. Yet every 4th of July, people continue gathering beneath the same summer sky. The holiday adapts without losing its heart. Records confirm that during the 20th century, Independence Day celebrations expanded dramatically as improved transportation, radio broadcasts, newspapers, and later television allowed millions of Americans to share common national experiences. A parade held in one city could soon be described across the country. Shared memory became easier to build. You stroll through a bustling small town during the 1920s. Shop windows sparkle with patriotic decorations. Bands march confidently along the main street. Veterans from the Civil War now stand beside younger veterans returning from more recent conflicts. Children scramble to collect candy tossed from colourful floats. The atmosphere feels optimistic. The nation is growing rapidly. Industries expand. Cities rise. New opportunities appear almost everywhere. The 4th of July becomes both a celebration of history and a celebration of progress. One curious footnote from the early 20th century reveals that communities often organised enormous pie baking contests alongside Independence Day festivals. Winning bakers earned local fame almost equal to parade champions, proving once again that food has always been one of history's favourite companions. Celebration is rarely complete without a generous meal. Then history changes course once more. The Great Depression arrives. Jobs disappear. Businesses close. Families struggle. Money becomes scarce. Yet something remarkable happens. Many communities refuse to abandon Independence Day. The celebrations become simpler. Parades shrink. Fireworks become fewer. Picnics replace expensive festivities. People gather anyway. Hope itself becomes worth celebrating. You quietly join one such gathering during the 1930s. Children laugh despite worn clothing. Neighbours share homemade dishes because buying extra food has become difficult. Musicians perform without expecting payment. The holiday reminds everyone that difficult seasons eventually pass. Sometimes tradition provides comfort when prosperity cannot. Soon another challenge arrives. The Second World War. Millions of Americans serve overseas. Factories operate day and night. Families once again wait anxiously for letters from distant battlefields. The 4th of July acquires renewed emotional meaning. Freedom is no longer remembered only as a historical achievement. It becomes something actively defended. Records confirm that Independence Day celebrations continued throughout World War II, often including military ceremonies, war bond campaigns, and public expressions of support for service members. The connection between the revolution and contemporary events feels immediate. History speaks across centuries. You imagine a summer evening in 1944. A family gathers quietly around a small radio after attending the local parade. They wonder where their son might be tonight. Perhaps he's crossing the English Channel. Perhaps he's somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. Perhaps he's simply hoping for another peaceful sunrise. Fireworks illuminate the sky outside. Inside, gratitude mixes gently with uncertainty. One scandalous aside concerns shortages of fireworks during wartime because many chemical materials are needed for military production. Resourceful communities improvised with lantern festivals, music, and patriotic concerts, proving that celebration depends more upon people than upon spectacle. Joy can adapt. After the war, America enters decades of extraordinary change. Suburbs expand. Highways stretch across the continent. Television brings national celebrations directly into living rooms. Millions watch fireworks together without leaving home. Families create traditions that repeat year after year. Grandparents tell revolutionary stories to curious grandchildren. Children eventually become grandparents themselves. The cycle quietly continues. You wander through a neighborhood picnic sometime during the late 20th century. Baseball games unfold in nearby parks. Neighbors compete in friendly sack races. Children decorate bicycles with red, white, and blue ribbons. The smell of grilled hamburgers, fresh watermelon, and homemade desserts drifts across the afternoon breeze. The revolution seems very distant, yet somehow it remains close. Every familiar tradition carries a small echo of those first celebrations held generations earlier. A government record demonstrates that Independence Day gradually became one of the most widely observed public holidays in the United States, bringing together people from different regions, backgrounds, faiths, and political beliefs through shared local traditions. Unity may never be perfect. It can still be meaningful. Of course, the holiday also evolves. Communities begin recognizing histories that earlier generations sometimes overlooked. Greater attention is given to the experiences of native peoples, enslaved Africans, and their descendants, immigrants, women, and countless ordinary citizens whose contributions once received less public recognition. The story grows richer, not because the past changes, because understanding becomes broader. Scholars continue discussing how modern Independence Day celebrations balance patriotic pride with honest reflection about the nation's successes and shortcomings. Many believe both perspectives strengthen historical understanding rather than weaken it. Perhaps genuine confidence allows room for thoughtful self-examination. As another peaceful evening settles across the country, families spread blankets across parks, beaches, riverbanks, and quiet hillsides. Children point excitedly toward the first bright rocket climbing into the darkening sky. Parents smile. Grandparents remember earlier celebrations now, many decades behind them. The fireworks bloom overhead in brilliant colours before fading gently into darkness. Each burst lasts only a moment. The tradition itself continues. Across changing centuries through prosperity and hardship, peace and conflict, technological revolutions and cultural change. Independence Day remains a familiar summer gathering where memory, gratitude and hope quietly meet beneath the stars. The journey, however, is not quite complete. One final reflection still awaits as 250 years of history gently settle into the present day. Your mind drifts gently into the present where another warm July evening settles, across towns, cities, quiet neighborhoods, mountain valleys and ocean shores. The familiar sounds of children laughing, distant music, and conversations between generations mingle with the soft rustle of leaves moving in a summer breeze. The scent of freshly cut grass, grilled food, and fireworks waiting for nightfall fills the peaceful air. 250 years have passed since those remarkable days in Philadelphia. The distance sounds enormous, yet history has a curious habit of folding time. The hopes, fears, triumphs and uncertainties of those first generations still echo through modern life in ways both obvious and subtle. You slowly walk through a neighborhood where families prepare for another 4th of July celebration. Some arrange folding chairs along the parade route. Others carry picnic baskets toward a nearby park. Children decorate bicycles with ribbons, while grandparents patiently tell stories that begin with the familiar words, "When I was your age." Every generation inherits the holiday. Every generation reshapes it just a little. Records confirm that the Declaration of Independence remains one of the most studied political documents in American history, influencing constitutional thought, civil rights movements, and democratic ideals far beyond the borders of the United States. Its words have travelled farther than its authors could ever have imagined. Across the centuries, people in many parts of the world have looked toward the American Revolution with admiration, curiosity, criticism, or inspiration. Some saw a model, others saw a warning, many saw both. History rarely offers only one lesson. You pause beside a public library where an exhibition displays carefully preserved copies of early documents, portraits, maps, and letters. Visitors move quietly from one display to another. Children ask thoughtful questions. Parents search for simple answers. The documents themselves remain silent. Their meaning continues to evolve. The Declaration has never been interpreted exactly the same way by every generation. Its ideals invite reflection. Its promises invite examination. Its imperfections invite continued discussion. That may be part of its enduring strength. One curious footnote from recent decades reveals that descendants of several Revolutionary War participants have occasionally met during Independence Day commemorations, discovering unexpected family connections that stretch back through nearly 2.5 centuries. The past has an extraordinary way of introducing strangers to one another. Meanwhile, historians continue uncovering new perspectives. The revolution is no longer told only through the experiences of famous leaders. Greater attention now falls upon women who managed farms while husbands served in the army, upon free and enslaved Black Americans whose lives were profoundly affected by the conflict, upon native nations navigating impossible choices between competing powers, upon immigrants, labourers, craftsmen, sailors, children, and countless ordinary people whose names rarely appear in textbooks. The story becomes more complete. Not because earlier generations intentionally ignored every voice, because each generation asks new questions of the past. You quietly wander through a modern museum where interactive exhibits allow visitors to hear diary entries, examine reconstructed homes, and explore detailed maps of colonial towns. Technology has changed dramatically. Human curiosity has not. Records from museums and historical organizations demonstrate that public interest in revolutionary history remains remarkably strong, especially during significant anniversaries when millions visit historic sites, attend reenactments, or participate in educational programs. History continues living beyond books. One scandalous aside concerns the occasional heated disagreement among historical reenactors over the smallest details of 18th century uniforms, buttons, or military drills. Friendly debates about authenticity can become surprisingly passionate, proving that devotion to history sometimes expresses itself through wonderfully specific arguments. Even buttons have their defenders. The anniversary approaching 250 years encourages fresh reflection. What does independence mean today? Does it refer only to political freedom, or does it also suggest civic responsibility, respectful disagreement, and the willingness to improve institutions inherited from earlier generations? No single answer satisfies everyone. Perhaps that is entirely appropriate. The founders themselves often disagreed vigorously. The conversation never truly ended. It simply continued through every generation. You notice children running beneath fluttering flags without worrying about political debates. For them, the holiday means family, games, ice cream, fireworks, simple happiness. Older listeners often see something more. They remember military service, parents and grandparents, historic anniversaries, national achievements, national disappointments. The holiday quietly holds all these memories together. Arguments continue among scholars regarding how Americans have interpreted the Declaration across different centuries. Some emphasize continuity, believing its central ideals remain remarkably consistent. Others stress changing interpretations shaped by expanding concepts of citizenship, equality, and justice. Both perspectives illuminate important parts of the historical journey. Perhaps history resembles a great river. The water constantly changes. The river somehow remains. As evening gradually deepens, fireworks begin rising above skylines. Lakes, rivers, beaches, and quiet country fields. Children gasp with delight. Parents smile at familiar traditions. Grandparents remember celebrations from decades long past. Above every crowd, bright colours briefly illuminate thousands of thoughtful faces. Each person brings different memories. Each watches the same sky. 250 years after the Declaration announced a daring new beginning, the holiday continues inviting reflection rather than demanding certainty. Its greatest gift may not be perfect agreement. Its greatest gift may be the opportunity to remember together, to celebrate together, and to continue asking how the ideals first written in that remarkable summer might be carried faithfully into the future. Only one final quiet step remains before our journey gently comes to rest beneath the peaceful summer stars. For a little while, simply remain where you are. The evening has grown wonderfully quiet. The last warmth of the day still lingers in the air while a gentle breeze stirs the branches overhead. Somewhere far away, the final echoes of fireworks fade into silence. The smell of summer grass remains after countless footsteps have crossed parks, town squares, village greens, and quiet front porches where families have gathered for another Independence Day. The celebration is slowly coming to an end. The story, however, continues. You have travelled across 250 remarkable years. You have walked through fragile colonial settlements where survival itself seemed uncertain. You have listened to anxious debates inside crowded meeting halls where ordinary people wrestled with extraordinary decisions. You have stood beside quiet village greens before the first shots of war changed history forever. You have crossed frozen rivers with exhausted soldiers who refused to surrender hope. You have entered candlelit rooms where patient diplomacy accomplished what armies alone never could. You have watched a young republic struggle to govern itself, grow across a continent, survive civil war, welcome new generations, and continually redefine the meaning of liberty. The journey has never been simple. History almost never is. Records confirm that the 4th of July remains one of the oldest continuously observed national holidays in the United States, connecting modern families with traditions first practiced during the earliest years of the Republic. That continuity is remarkable. Empires have risen and fallen. Borders have shifted. Technologies have transformed everyday life beyond imagination. Yet every summer people still gather beneath open skies to remember a declaration written in the heat of another July long ago. You quietly walk once more through Philadelphia. The streets are peaceful now. Tourists stroll past historic buildings. Schoolchildren pause to listen as guides tell familiar stories. The old brick walls have witnessed generations beyond counting. They have watched horses disappear and automobiles arrive. They have seen telegrams replaced by telephones, radios, televisions, computers, and devices that would have seemed like magic to the delegates of 1776. The buildings remain. Time continues flowing around them. One curious footnote from modern celebrations reveals that some families have attended the same local Independence Day parade for 4 or even 5 generations, standing along nearly identical streets where their grandparents and great-grandparents once watched similar processions decades earlier. Traditions possess a quiet kind of endurance, not because they never change, because each generation chooses to carry them forward. You find yourself returning in your imagination to the peaceful harbour where this long journey truly began. Ships still rest upon gentle water. The tide continues rising and falling exactly as it did centuries ago. Seagulls circle overhead. Evening light reflects softly across the waves. It is almost impossible to believe that such calm surroundings once witnessed arguments capable of reshaping world history. Perhaps that is history's greatest lesson. Extraordinary change often begins in ordinary places. A print shop, a farmhouse, a harbour, a meeting hall, a family table. A conversation between neighbours, one thoughtful decision followed by another, one courageous act inspiring the next, one generation leaving unfinished work for those who follow. One scandalous aside from history reminds us that even many of the revolution's celebrated leaders disagreed sharply with one another throughout their lives. Friendship and disagreement often existed side by side, proving that passionate debate has always been part of the American story rather than a departure from it. Nations like families continue learning. The work is never completely finished. Scholars continue discussing which legacy of Independence Day has proven most influential over the past 2.5 centuries. Some point toward constitutional government. Others emphasize expanding civil rights. Still others believe the holiday's greatest achievement lies in its ability to encourage each generation to examine both national accomplishments and national responsibilities. Perhaps every one of those ideas contains part of the answer. History rarely asks us to choose only one truth. Instead, it invites us to listen carefully, to remember honestly, and to continue learning with humility. Now the sky grows darker. The stars appear one by one. The final voices from distant celebrations become softer, until only the peaceful sounds of summer remain. You have walked beside farmers and presidents, printers and soldiers, children and grandparents, merchants and diplomats, famous names and forgotten lives. Together they created a story larger than any single person could have imagined. The 4th of July is not only the memory of one remarkable day in 1776, it is the continuing conversation between generations. It is the annual reminder that freedom asks something of every age. It asks for courage. It asks for wisdom. It asks for patience. It asks for hope. And perhaps most of all, it asks people to remember that even the greatest moments in history began with ordinary human beings trying imperfectly yet sincerely to build a better tomorrow. As you quietly leave this long historical journey behind, the summer night welcomes you with its familiar stillness. The harbour grows silent. The campfires fade. The meeting hall's empty. The parades end. Only the stars remain shining above the same continent that has witnessed every chapter of this remarkable 250-year story. As our journey gently comes to its peaceful close, allow the sounds of history to settle like distant echoes across a calm summer evening. Perhaps the faces you remember most are not the famous ones, but the ordinary people who quietly carried the story forward through courage, patience, sacrifice, and hope. If one moment stayed with you tonight, whether it was the first colonial villages, the determined march through winter, the reading of the Declaration, or the simple family gatherings beneath July skies, I would love for you to share it in the comments. Your favourite moment may become someone else's reason to appreciate history in a new way. Thank you for spending this quiet time together. If you enjoyed this peaceful journey through the past, there are many more stories waiting for you on the channel where forgotten people, remarkable civilizations, and extraordinary moments unfold at a gentle pace, one restful evening at a time. Until our next journey, may your night be peaceful, your thoughts be light, and your rest be deep.